I'm still running for Speaker, and I plan to go to the floor and get the votes and win this race.
We need to make sure government still runs. And I think we should be having a resolution on the floor in support of Israel.
What I think we've seen in Ukraine is that there isn't a clear plan for the administration.
Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland joins us now from Capitol Hill. Scott, thank you. Why is Jordan pushing for a third ballot if he knows the votes aren't there?
Not sure what the other exit ramp would be at this point, Bob. There was a raucous 4-hour House Republican meeting today in which they talked about this idea of temporarily expanding the powers and portfolio of Speaker Pro Tem Patrick McHenry. And that idea landed with a raucous thud in the room. It was dead on arrival. Republicans recognized pretty quickly they'd have to do a lot of outreach to Democrats to get that idea to pass. They'd have to partner with Democrats. And even though we're in a crisis of their making, they don't want to have Democrats help them escape this crisis. So the only path forward, they deem, is to have Jim Jordan try to swing the votes of at least 18 of 22 defectors. And there are climbs, there are uphill climbs, and then there are this type of mountainous climb that Jim Jordan faces trying to do so. He ended the afternoon meeting with some of them, but there's been no indication any of them are wavering.
So how long does this last? I mean, does Jordan just keep going to the floor like McCarthy did earlier this year and go ballot after ballot, hoping to wear them down? But a lot of these traditional Republicans don't seem ready to be even in a conversation about moving their vote.
This is so complex. First of all, because there is a level of exhaustion. And as they wander down this path as a Republican conference, they are leaving a trail of bad blood behind them. The animosity is rising. There are new factions forming, and a lot of this is getting personal. One Republican, Ken Buck of Colorado, told me today he doesn't think Jim Jordan's doing enough to tamp down the threats so many of these dissenters and defectors are getting, Ken Buck among them. And we've seen reports of death threats against some of these Republicans who've gone another way. Jordan has disavowed those threats, so has his staff, but they think he can do more to cool things off. I asked a sampling of Republicans late today what they think happens next. You'll hear the answers are less than clear.
So the resolution is dead on arrival.
Not enough support?
No. And it would be foolish for us to go to the floor without 217.
The other Republicans are saying the next step is for Jim Jordan to bring you and the others in a room and change your minds. No resolution to temporarily empower Mr. McHenry. How's that going to go?
Oh, I don't know. I think the next step is to go to the floor and have another vote, see where we are. And then he can figure out who the 20, 30, 40 are that are opposed and move forward from there.
You think there's more than 22?
I do think there's more than 22.
And Bob, there's obviously one key difference between this circumstance and Kevin McCarthy's circumstance. Every roll call vote exerts political pain on some of the moderates in swing districts who continue to support Jim Jordan. It wasn't true in the Kevin McCarthy case. Taking a real tough vote, so the more often you drag them out there for that vote, the more endangered some of these Republicans who stick with Jordan become.
Let's listen to what Congressman Jordan had to say to reporters earlier today.
We made the pitch to members on the resolution as a way to lower the temperature and get back to work. We decided that wasn't where we're going to go. I'm still running for Speaker, and I plan to go to the floor and get the votes and win this race. But I want to go talk with a few of my colleagues. Particularly, I want to talk with the 20 individuals who voted against me.
So Jordan's still in, Scott, and just about 20, 30 seconds left here. If not Jordan, who?
Oh, if there was a name that we could offer, he or she would be the Speaker already. They've been in this quagmire for days knowing Jim Jordan had a real steep climb. I think you have to hit rock bottom sometimes before you open your mind broader. And it feels like after this day, maybe the next ballot, getting close to rock bottom.
They keep digging inside of the House Republican Conference. Scott McFarland, thank you. President Biden addressed the nation tonight about the U.S. response to the wars in both the Middle East and Ukraine. It was only the second Oval Office address of his presidency. Here are some of his remarks.
I know these conflicts can seem far away, and it's natural to ask, why does this matter to America? So let me share with you why making sure Israel and Ukraine succeed is vital for America's national security. You know, history has taught us that when terrorists don't pay a price for their terror, When dictators don't pay a price for their aggression, they cause more chaos and death and more destruction. They keep going, and the cost and the threats to America and the world keep rising.
And Friday, CBS News shares more stories from inside this devastating war. You can stream the special, Israel-Hamas War, The World on Edge, Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern. CBS News polling, meanwhile, shows that Americans have mixed reactions to President Biden's approach to international conflicts, especially the war between Israel and Hamas. CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, he joins us now to break it down. Anthony, tell us about how Americans are looking at the president's handling of what's going on between Israel and Hamas, this conflict, this war.
Sure. Good to talk to you, Bob. Look, start off with this. Now, Biden's approval on handling this conflict is just a few ticks higher than his overall approval, and it's net negative. And part of this is the partisan splits that you might expect to see, but I want to point this out, Bob. It's a little bit less partisan than you might otherwise expect because you've got a third of Democrats who disapprove of how Biden's handling this. And Republicans, okay, this is not high at 28% approval, but it is higher than the way they approve of him overall or on a lot of other issues. Why is that? Well, you used the word in the intro, mixed. And there's a bit of a mix on what exactly people want Joe Biden to do. I think it's really interesting to set that up in anticipation of his talk tonight. There's 44% who say, okay, he's providing the right amount of support to Israel. But then the rest, well, should he provide more, right? Is he not providing enough? And a quarter who say he's providing too much. So which direction does that go? When you follow up with people and say, okay, if he's not providing enough, what should he do? They want him to criticize Hamas more, but then another half don't really have a firm answer. They say they just don't like his approach, and I think that it reflects a lot of the uncertainty in the situation, Bob.
Anthony, what did Americans tell CBS News polling about whether the United States should send weapons to Israel or not?
Yeah, mixture there, too. What should the U.S. do? You've got a strong majority saying, yes, send humanitarian aid to Israel. You've got another strong majority saying, use diplomacy. And part of underpinning that is that there's a widespread concern among Americans that this might lead to a wider conflict or that there might be terrorism back here in the U.S. So use of diplomacy, humanitarian aid to Palestinians in Gaza, a majority, not as high as for Israel, but notably not as much, more division on whether to send weapons and supplies to Israel. That gets division, humanitarian aid less so, Bob.
And quickly, in just about 30 seconds here, Anthony, what really stands out? What's your big takeaway?
The uncertainty that comes among Americans on what happens next. These big numbers, concern about a wider war, they underpin a lot of that mixture that you see in the rest of the opinions, Bob.
Anthony Salvanto, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Next, we take you back to Capitol Hill to analyze the ongoing speaker stalemate with our panel. You're streaming America Decides.
I like the idea of staying in there, take your jackets off, pack some lunches, get some bag lunches in here. We don't leave there until we get a speaker.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was Texas Republican Congressman Troy Nehls calling on his conference to elect a speaker immediately. Molly Ball and Katia Goba join us now. Molly is a senior political correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. Katia is a politics reporter for Semaphore. Great to have you both here. Really appreciate it. Katia, we'll start with you. So when you look at the speaker's race, Jordan moving toward a third ballot, but maybe not. What's your read, talking to all your sources on Capitol Hill, about where this stands?
So there's about 22-ish holdouts right now. He's not gaining support. He said that he's going in back and behind closed doors to talk to these people, but you have like moderates from New York who are, trying to get like their SALT priorities, and then you have just people who are just not into a Jim Jordan speakership, mainly because they're upset about what happened to McCarthy and how Scalise was treated. So I don't see him gaining more traction. I just think that we inevitably will be going down the route of giving McHenry more powers with the help of Democrats at this point, because you already hear Republicans are saying they're not with it.
Molly, what's your latest reporting?
Well, you know, the bedrock of opposition to Jim Jordan has been some of the appropriators, right? People like Kay Granger, the Cardinals, the subcommittee chairs from the Appropriations Committee, because they are the people that Jim Jordan has tortured for years. He has made their lives heck. And they don't want him to be speaker as a result. And they are not seeing anything from what I've been seeing and hearing that has made them any more excited about a Jim Jordan speakership in the last couple of days. They're only getting more dug in. He may have more no votes on a third ballot than he had on the second, and he had more on the second than he had on the first. At the same time, as Kadia was just saying, this compromise plan has completely fallen apart. It's been declared dead. Jordan, who supported it this morning, has now walked away from it. So there's a feeling that we're almost back at square one, and nobody has any idea where it can go.
Kadia, you've been reporting extensively on the right wing of the Republican Party. I've read your reporting for Semaphore. What's the outside pressure campaign at this moment to keep Jordan in the race versus maybe moving toward a consensus pick or toward empowering the Speaker pro tem, Patrick McHenry?
So a lot of people are just blaming it on the base. There was reports that Miller Meeks was harassed and some other members, some of their family members. There was one member who said they had to have a guard or some security by their child's school. But you know, no member of Congress is taking claim about these harassment. They're mainly saying that the base is at fault here. And I mean, either way, it doesn't look good for a Speaker Jordan for things like this to be happening. And I will say, in terms of him pushing on appropriations, or there's also this idea about the aggression that's bubbling up here and how the conference is already divided. So here we have more people doubling down the right specifically for Jordan. I don't know where that leaves the other factions of the conference, and it just seems more divided here, which is why, like I keep saying, they're going to have to depend on Democrats at this point.
I heard CBS News heard that things got so tense today. Kevin McCarthy, the former speaker, was yelling at Matt Gaetz in this closed-door meeting among Republicans. What about Democrats? They're watching this from afar, maybe not too far away. You're a biographer of former Speaker Nancy Pelosi. How do you believe veteran Democrats like Pelosi, like Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader, are handling this moment? Are they going to ever maybe shed a few votes to get the House back on track?
The feeling among Democrats is that they can't dance if they haven't been asked. At the same time, they have made various formal proposals, whether it's Leader Jeffries or other Democrats who may have more relationships with Republicans across the aisle due to their membership in, something like the Problem Solvers Caucus or their state delegations. But none of that has achieved any kind of formal standing, in part because Republicans have been very clear that they don't want it, and that any kind of collaboration with Democrats is seen as a red line. I think Democrats have gone over the last couple of weeks from sort of licking their chops at the chaos. Earlier this week, former Speaker Emerita Pelosi walked off the floor and said to reporters, well, they're out there learning to do math. And she was famous for her ability to count votes. And she was able to pull off a lot more with a majority exactly this narrow. At the same time, I think they've gone from sort of gleefully watching the other side burn to really being concerned about where this all goes if they can't get their act together.
Who are you watching beyond Patrick McHenry, the Speaker pro tem, beyond Jim Jordan? Could there be a Kevin Hern from Oklahoma, a Jody Arrington, Tom Cole from Oklahoma, Elise Stefanik from New York? Is there any candidate out there, a potential candidate you're watching as someone who in this storm could walk in and say it's time for a change?
Well, I have sources are telling me that the Texas delegation is planning on introducing nominating Arrington. Not sure where that will go, because at the same time I heard there's 4 oppositions from the delegation about this idea. But also,
it's a strong delegation, though.
Yeah, it is. It's long, but if you have 4 people already in closed doors talking about opposing that, that's kind of like a dead-end situation, it seems to me. I know this is a dark horse, but a lot of people behind the scenes have floated Kathy McMorris Rodgers, and that'll be interesting to see. I'm still thinking that it's going to be a McHenry. I think Democrats are more comfortable with him. I just think Republicans had an opportunity to do this without Democratic help. coalescing around McHenry without making concessions. And just to show you how fractured the conference is, they can't get it done.
Very quickly, who are you watching, Molly?
Well, I'm watching all of them. You know, I think another thing that you keep hearing, you know, the person who keeps getting the most votes besides the nominee on the floor is Kevin McCarthy. And you had Mike Lawler from New York, one of those moderates, putting out a statement just a few minutes ago saying that we should nominate McCarthy again. He is the only Republican who's proven he can get 217 votes on the floor.
Molly Ball, got you go, but we really appreciate you coming by. Thank you so much. Come back again.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. California Senator LaFonza Butler, a Democrat, will not seek to be elected to a full term in 2024. She was appointed to follow the late Dianne Feinstein, who died late last month. Senator Butler never held political office before being appointed to the seat. The crowded field for that seat now includes 3 Democratic congressional members. As President Biden reaffirms American support for Israel, Russia and China are deepening ties. Next, we discuss why global divisions are deepening right now. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. During President Biden's trip to Israel, Russian President Vladimir Putin was in Beijing. Putin met with Chinese leader Xi Jinping to reaffirm the partnership between the two countries. While President Biden has affirmed the American support for Israel, Russia and China have called for a ceasefire. Steve Inskeep joins us now. He is a host of NPR's Morning Edition. He is also the author of the terrific new book, Defer We Must, How Lincoln Succeeded in a Divided America. Steve, thanks so much for being here.
Glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Steve, you have spent a lot of this week talking to people, covering this conflict, analyzing this conflict. What is this moment like for the United States as well as for Israel and Palestinian leaders as they confront it?
I thought it was telling earlier this week when President Biden spoke in public during his visit to Israel, and maybe caution is not the word, but tried to offer words of wisdom to the Israelis about going too far, doing things that they would regret, as he said the United States had done after 9/11. The question is, how far is Israel willing to go? How many civilian casualties would become too many? I had an opportunity to talk with an Israeli cabinet minister just at the beginning of this conflict who said in advance, before being asked, civilians are going to be killed and the world just needs to accept it. I paraphrase here, but essentially he said this is inevitable and be prepared for it. He gets a warning then, or Israel gets a warning then from the president about whether you might go too far. These massive protests may not matter to the Israeli government now. They need to respond to their people, but at some point it becomes a serious problem for them and for the United States.
What's your assessment of where the United States is in terms of how long it could support Israel in this conflict?
Well, it seems to me that the United States would stick with Israel for a long time because it is a bipartisan matter. It is not peeling apart in quite the same partisan way that Ukraine is, for example. President Biden, even as he has sent these notes of caution, has emphasized the United States supports Israel. I don't think Israel's political support is in any particular danger, and the money is there, assuming that the House of Representatives gets together at some point to actually do its job.
I took a walk yesterday past the Lincoln Memorial, and I thought about your book, which is just a great read. And
thank you.
When you think about the divisions then under Lincoln, obviously civil war, high tension in the country, it's not directly comparable to what's happening on Capitol Hill in any way, but what are the lessons we could learn from your book and from Lincoln about how to interpret now?
Yeah, I mean, I think about this a lot because I realized that Abraham Lincoln did deal with people that he disagreed with. This book tells his life story through his meetings with 16 people that he differed with in some way. It didn't always succeed. Some of them went to war against him. But he understood that he didn't need to get everyone to agree. What he needed was a majority. That's what democracy is about. And it was interesting in your previous segment to hear the joke about the Republicans learning to count. They're trying to get to a majority, but they seem to have started this process of decapitating their leadership without knowing how they can get a majority for anybody else. That's the most basic thing. You can't get anything else done if you don't do that. That is a fundamental truth that Lincoln understood. And I'm sure that the Republicans trying to build a majority now would say they understand, but they got themselves in a position where they don't have it.
What was Lincoln's approach to differences of opinion that really set him apart from other leaders?
I think he didn't take things personally. Frederick Douglass, a great anti-slavery activist, publicly eviscerated Lincoln again and again and again, called him a racist, called him all kinds of things for being slow to act against slavery. Lincoln still took meetings from Douglas, and they became friends, and they absolutely were allies in the cause. Lincoln didn't take it personally. He also didn't act like he was morally superior to people on the other side of the issue, even slave owners. He believed slavery was morally wrong, that the system needed to be destroyed, but he didn't say that it was a personal matter that made him need to virtue signal or show how he was better than the other person. And that sometimes did make it possible for him to deal with people who had very wrong beliefs, but he could get some value out of them for the country.
Just the final minute here, Steve. Are you confident when you look at the future, not just as a reporter, but as a historian?
Confident. Well, I'm confident there will be a future.
Okay, so pretty bleak.
Yeah, well, I don't know about that. I mean, I have a certain amount of hope just because I take a long view. And I realize that things that seem terrible to us now may not turn out to be so. The Civil War was a terrible tragedy in which hundreds of thousands died, but it ended slavery and led to a more equal society. We're not going through that kind of extreme struggle now. We are going through struggles about what kind of a country we want to live in, and that could end up being for the better. We don't know, and we won't know for another decade or two or many.
Steve Inskeep. Just great to have you here on set. We appreciate it, and congratulations on your new book.
Thanks.
Another accomplishment for Steve. That does it for our show today. Thanks for watching. You're streaming CBS News.